Hi, I'm going to talk about symbols in general and personal symbols and the meaning that is given to those things by different people, different cultures across time. We have had a tendency, almost in every culture, to label, give meaning to, accentuate the meaning of different things and people by adding to how that person is already named. We'll put it that way. So, for example, there was this young warrior chief who had a horse that did crazy stuff. And it was an amazing horse. And as this particular tribe tells it, when they rode up to the bank of a particular river and saw the cavalry on a little mound across the way, well, the bank of the river was rather steep. But this particular warrior's horse just went boom right over it. And because he did, because his horse did, everybody else was like, well, let's go ahead and go. And they won this particular battle. His horse was crazy. He ended up with the name Crazy Horse. That was the battle that ended Custer's life and victory in the area. So people will get called certain things, or there's certain titles that become important. Teams, mascots, that sort of thing. Adding to with a symbol or a name. It's very uncommon that you have a sports team that has a particular name without a symbol that goes along with it. In fact, I don't know of any sports team that has a name without this cool symbol. Companies. Name a company that doesn't have a logo. What are logos? The term logo, a meaning, a visual meaning representing what that company is. I believe that having a personal symbol is a valuable thing to have. Think of, how you want to present yourself in the world. Well, you have your name that was given to you, and across time, you as an individual have the ability to maybe even give yourself another name or add to your name, or make a symbol for yourself that means something special to you. I'm going to return back to that. First, go to language and cultures. Most languages started out as logogrammic or ideogrammic languages. In other words, they're in terms of what's written in those languages. In other words, symbols were drawn or impressed in clay or painted or pecked into stone or etched into bone to be able to pass the meaning of whatever it was etched, pecked, painted to somebody else, and they would know what that meaning is. So a image that had meaning, or an image that had an idea. So a logogram, ideogram. Some of the first examples of this would be cuneiform writing in the Middle East, Mesopotamian area. There were clay tablets that had these little combinations of wedge-like shapes imprinted on the clay. At first, these things just tracked sort of the transportation of goods. It was math. It was just counting, like clerks. That there's 5 bags of grain went that direction on that day. There's a combination of 4 of these wedge marks, and then one off to the side that meant 5. It also meant hand. So eventually, that evolved into several different languages, an Assyrian version, a Babylonian version, for example, Assyrian version, a Hittite version. Anyway, there were different versions of cuneiform in different languages, or slightly different, but they all had like this little combination of these little wedges. There are symbols to this day that certainly meant something, and then they somehow made a language, but they're pictures of little things that you can identify as maybe a bone or a cow head or something like that. And that was the part of the Minoan language that still isn't known, but these were symbols. The oldest ideograms, logograms in the area that's now known as China were inscriptions, little inscriptions of pictures of things on bones. They were called oracle bones at the time. So inscriptions on turtle bones or different shells or whatever that had like the picture of a horse, for example, or a bird. If you look at how that horse was inscribed and to study the subject, you'll see that the picture of a horse evolved into a stylized picture of a horse, which evolved into a more stylized picture of a horse, which evolved into a stylized in terms of size and dimensions to match up with characters of other things. And right now, to this day, the character for horse is just a super stylized version of a picture of a horse. And there's quite a few examples of that. Heart would be another one. Like a drawn picture, somebody who drew a heart with a few lines of an actual human heart, that got stylized and is part of many Chinese characters now. In this area, in the Southwest, symbols were part of a language of very practical things like this area, you're blocked if you keep walking across this area, or that's a deep place, or this is where people had to defend themselves, or this is where water is, or this is where people died because there was no water, or things that if you understand that language, you'd be able to know where maybe not to stay or where to go ahead and go, and that kind of thing. It was later in human history that a symbol was used for a sound. And perhaps the thing in that local area that everybody knew the name of it, let's say a particular, like a bull, everybody knew the name of that thing that starts with an ah sound or an a sound, for example. And so this symbol of two lines going up and one line across, a V and then a line, that was a symbol for the bull, but everybody knew that starts with this sound. Well, that upside down actually is the letter A. That's how that started, more or less. Okay, so in that local area, the symbol for something that people knew what that sounded like now became the symbol for an actual sound. So that's where you get this symbol that maybe doesn't mean anything, but it may have at one time. And now for any 5-year-old, 6-year-old, whenever we start learning how to identify the sounds of a letter, we know that symbol means b, or that symbol means l. And for some languages, that symbol means a concept, or several symbols together mean a more complicated concept, which has the equivalent enunciation verbally of words. So symbols are actually a really big deal in the human psyche. And we have a tendency as cultures to want to add meaning to symbols when sometimes that particular meaning wasn't even there to begin with. When the Romans took over the world, their alphabet became part of the culture of many cultures. The people in the northern European areas adopted the Roman alphabet and then changed it. They're called runes now. There's a couple versions of the system of runes, and they took out some letters entirely. They added some twists to other letters, and the letters still meant sounds, but they also meant concepts. and it became part of the a cultural aspect of their belief system, magic, and all kinds of things. Bind runes would be put together not necessarily to describe to create a word that could be verbally enunciated, but combinations of these runes in different shapes would be put together to create a more broad concept even. It's just fascinating. Symbols and humans involvement with symbols starts from the very beginning of humans communicating one with another, all the way to, by the way, I haven't even mentioned the caves in on the coast of France and Spain of these drawings of animals from 12,000 BC and actually a lot earlier than that. People have been trying to show symbolically their world and communicate it to other human beings forever. Some of the animals that were painted in those caves weren't painted perfectly like those animals really existed. They would be, some of them just like a line outline, and then another animal overlaid on that, and another one even intermixed with that. It's just amazing our drive to communicate with one another or to lend meaning to other people through what we can create. And that became language. We can hardly think without language. In fact, some would argue thinking doesn't happen without language. Okay, so with that in mind and how humans function, wouldn't it be cool to create for yourself a personal symbol that for you had personal meaning? So I'm going to talk a little about my personal symbol. So years and years ago, when I was engaged to be married, the most important thing to me at the time had to do with my life in conjunction with the person that I married and our life together. So I made a beadwork panel, and I'll just hold it up to the camera there. So if you can't tell, those are two S's, more like Z's. Stylized Z's, but they're stylized S's, like little lightning bolts that are woven together, and that's for Sherry and Shane. So two stylized S's. Here's another version. I carved that into a piece of walnut, and I had a little G, and this used to have a chain connected to it, but there you go, two S's. That was my my symbol for a long time. Then I started learning more about symbols. I didn't really know much about symbols at that time, so the best I, had was to kind of show this idea of being unified and creating a life together, right? So then later, when I found out more about symbols, I found out what the Good Journey symbol was. And here with this little, I made an ocarina and I added my personal symbol to it. And you can see there's the symbol for Good Journey, and then the double S is still there, and then 6 little lines. Now this was, by the time I had 6 children, the 6 lines were part of my personal symbol. For a little while, my personal symbol just had 1 line, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6. Then later, I switched the lines that were independent of the Good Journey symbol, the sheep symbol, and put the lines up on top. You can see that there's 6 lines there, and the double S is still there. Then, most recently, I added a couple little marks, a couple little tick marks on the antlers of the animal. So you can see there, it's the same as what I showed before. It's got the double S down in where it's always been, and it has the 6 lines, but 2 of them, the 3rd one and the 4th one, have little tiny sort of tick marks themselves coming off the back side of them. So that's my personal symbol now. Good Journey. I still have my double S, and I have the 6 lines for my 6 children, and then 1 little grandbaby and another little grandbaby. So when more grandkids come, I will remake and reprint my personal symbol to take that into account. That's just mine. That's what I've done over a 30-year period of time. I had a personal symbol, and it evolved along the way. And it has particular meaning to me. I put it on things that I make. Obviously, I print it on masks that I take out to the trail, or sometimes when I'm wearing them in public or whatever. It helps me sort of track where I want to go and what I want to maintain. About 4 days ago, I saw posted on the internet a round symbol with Kokopelli in the middle, playing a flute, and all these different kinds of wilderness concepts around this Kokopelli. And somebody had just tattooed it on themselves, I think on their arm. And I saw that drawing this young man showed me out on the trail about 3 months ago. It was drawn in his book, and he said, I'm going to make a tattoo of this. And he explained all this meaning that he had put behind it. The central figure was a pendant that he'd received from the culture that he was in at the time. And it was so important to him that he wanted to memorialize it forever. And that has happened a lot in my experience, by the way. People who have discovered symbols that mean something to them personally, that's why they chose those particular tattoos. And a lot of it from programs where they were a participant and they learned very specific lessons and concepts that they value highly. So symbols are a big deal. If you work with children, you can actually help them decide to make and help them make a personal symbol for themselves. There are thousands of ideas to draw from in terms of symbols. I mentioned a few already. So cuneiform ideas, ancient Chinese logogram character ideas, Minoan culture symbols, runes, Native American type symbols, or petroglyph language symbols. It goes on and on. Hieroglyphs, Egyptian hieroglyphs, trigrams from Korean culture and Asian culture sort of intermixed with all that. It goes on and on. We have a tendency in this culture, and a lot of cultures, to be somewhat directionless. Well, let's help young people have direction and be purposeful. And one of the ways we can do that, just like a company makes a logo, like, hey, what do you want something that is symbolic of you to look like, feel like, and what meaning do you want it to be embedded in it? And then draw that, on stuff that you carry around with you. Have a patch made, put it on your backpack that you carry around. Draw it on things that you make, or paint it on a wall in your room to remind you that you're moving in a certain direction. My personal symbol means A, B, C, and D. And this is who I want to be. This is who I want to continue to be. And in the future, I might switch it up a little bit. So that is a cool thing to do. Not a lot of young people, at least in the United States, have ever even thought to do that. But the process of helping them make a symbol, a personal symbol, the process of helping them find, of all the symbols that there are, a combination of which to join together to make their personal symbol, and how it might serve as an intention for them moving forward in their life, is all something that I have found to be very helpful. And in programs that I've created or that I run, we have a lot of symbols embedded into the entire process. And young people have found an incredible amount of value out of that experience. So, go look into symbols, make a personal symbol, help young people around you make personal symbols that might be helpful in their lives. Thanks.